Welcome back. Now, Sasol has released its interim production and sales metrics indicating that the energy business has improved due to higher production and productivity. In the meantime, analysts are questioning whether the group's plans of becoming a green company is just hot air, while JP Morgan cites that it sees no credible plans for Sasol's decarbonisation post-2013. Tracey Davies, who's Executive Director for shareholder activism group at JustShare, joins us with her take. Tracey, always a pleasure. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Nolatando. Thank you.
Tracey, there seems to be questions around Sasol and possibly going through an existential crisis. I'm keen to get your thoughts on whether the situation is that dire.
Well, of course, Sasol has a big journey ahead of it. It is an enormous polluter. It emits an enormous amount of greenhouse gases, a huge contributor to the climate crisis. But it's also a very difficult business to decarbonize. And a couple of years ago, Sasol came out with an emission reduction plan where it said that it would reduce its emissions by 30% by 2030. And that is a significant task and a significant challenge for the company. And I think that what's happening now is that analysts and others are starting to understand the scale of that challenge. And there were always questions about the feasibility and viability of Sasol's plan right from the start, particularly when it came to things like sourcing affordable gas to replace coal as a feedstock, which Sasol has still not managed to do. And so I think, as time goes by and the plan stays, but emissions don't go down, people are really questioning how feasible this is. And if there had been significant emission reductions or even some emission reductions due to the implementation of this plan over the past couple of years, then that would be one thing. But unfortunately, emissions are going up, and Sasol predicts that they will go up again next year. And so, what you're starting to see is a very small window of time to 2030, no discernible progress on reducing emissions, and Sasol expecting the market to just trust it that at some point in the next 6 years it will get things right. And I think that the lack of feasibility of that is really starting to sink in.
Of course, we know the AGM went ahead as planned, I think, last week, Friday, if I'm not mistaken, Tracey. And I'm keen to get the thoughts on this because, of course, many shareholders have brought this forward. It is something that has been on the radar of many of the largest shareholders within Sasol. I'm keen to get the response from the executives at the company with regards to decarbonisation.
Sasol repeatedly reiterates its commitment to its decarbonisation plan. And there were lots of questions about whether or not that plan is feasible at the AGM. And Sasol's response is to say, we're committed to it, we'll do it. But that is a hard ask for people just to kind of take you at your word. And especially when we have a situation where the executives that have put this plan in place may not be around to see it through. In fact, Mr. Grobler is leaving already this year. And so, he won't be held accountable if the plan fails. There was an interesting comment from the chief financial officer in an article on this today in the Financial Mail saying, we don't understand why people are questioning our ability to decarbonize because we've committed to it. But the fact that they've committed to it is really quite meaningless when there are no mechanisms in place to hold them accountable for achieving it. And, the South African institutional investors and shareholders are not traditionally very hard on executives. They don't really make sure that they're accountable for their promises. And at Sasol in particular, we've seen that Sasol has been making commitments to decarbonize for 20 years. And they simply haven't achieved any of their targets. And so I think it's quite unreasonable for Sasol to paint skeptics, in a negative light, because in actual fact, everything that's come before is a precursor to very reasonable skepticism about what the future will hold.
Tracey, I'm keen to get your thoughts on what exactly Sasol needs at this point. Of course, it needs a plan, a credible plan that experts can okay. It needs the money. I assume that this would be a capital-intensive process here. And I guess skills, I'm not concerned too much about the skills. There are many engineers within that space very capable. And, if I just think of these three things, do we have at least two?
So yes, it has a plan. It already has a plan, and a plan that it states is absolutely doable. The business is a very technical business, and there are elements of the nitty-gritty of the transition that really only internal Sasol engineers will really understand, which I think is part of the problem. There's some level of opacity around what's actually required here. But the capital requirement is probably the biggest issue, because shareholders are looking at Sasol and saying, we want returns, we want you to pay out dividends. And Sasol needs to say, and I think needs to be more upfront with the market about the fact that actually this transition is going to be expensive, and it's going to cost shareholders some of their returns. And this is really a problem that's being faced across the globe, this trade-off between short-term returns and long-term viability of many of these carbon-intensive businesses. And of course, what that means is the trade-off between short-term returns and emission reductions, which is an existential problem for mankind, really. So it's a microcosm of a problem that's playing out across the world. And about which we're not being very realistic. People are still pretending that we can transition and make these changes, but everyone will be a winner. And that's simply not true. We've got to be more realistic about it. So Sasol has a plan. It might have the money. It depends a lot on the attitude and approach of its shareholders and what the global markets do. But there are details and issues about which Sasol just seems perennially reluctant to be upfront and open about. And I really think that that's what's driving a lot of the doubt and skepticism in the market. And as I say, I think it's crucial to reiterate the fact that its emissions went up last year. They say they will go up again this year. At what point are we going to see a change here? It's impossible to believe that in 2029, Sasol would reduce its emissions by 30%. That is simply not credible.
Well, Tracey, it's all we have time for today. Thank you for speaking to us about this, and I hope we can keep chatting. I think this is an important part of South Africa's economy, and we're all invested in seeing, this turnaround for Sasol. Thank you so much for being with us. That was Executive Director of JustShare, Tracey Davies.